what is it that you then go on to do with that information, and how do you sort of improve, or when they need that sort of like deload weeks, how do you manage all that?
Yeah, I'll give you a scenario with just one athlete because he's been my most consistent guy since like eighth grade, which is like middle school, and then now he's in high school. He's in his second year of high school. Um, he's a three-sport athlete, meaning he plays American football. When the school year starts up, he transitions into basketball, and then he's in baseball, and he's also running track right now. So his workloads are crazy high throughout the year. He almost gets no breaks because he goes right from playoffs and football finishing to the next week starting basketball, and he has no kind of, which is fine. Like, he's a sophomore. For me, you got to be able to just, if that's that time where you just got to be diverse and do everything. That's the kind of coach that I like to always tell
I
my
agree.
athletes to be
I
like,
agree.
to do everything. You can't just be a baseball guy and just throw all the time, or a American football guy and just do that. Like, you have to be diverse. But anyways, with him in football season, and I'll just give you an easy scenario. Like, we were able to get him on GPS Monday through Friday, from practice Monday through Thursday to game day on Friday. Um, the first couple weeks, I didn't make too many adjustments in what we were looking at. But I did notice that he was never hitting top speed in practice or in games, like rarely. Within the first like 4 to 6 weeks of just preseason, and then transitioning into season. So for him, it was hard because I know that he needed to have that speed dosage every single week, right? 90-95%, whatever coaches like to use. But I also didn't want to take him out. We train at 6:30 in the morning before school. Sometimes it's cold. Sometimes it's not the best environment to have an athlete. We're not out at the field. Maybe we're on cement. So it's hard to get him to get up to top speed on those days. So understanding that he didn't hit top speed in practices or in games, seeing the data on that, I was able to just, ask him. He asked his coaches to get on special teams on a couple of days where he just got a chance to open up and hit his top speed day for his top speed runs for the week. And that's when he was typically getting all of his high speed running in, So for us, it was important. He played a certain position. He was a two-way guy. So his loads were super high already on Friday game days. And usually Tuesdays were his most freshest day of the week. So that's when he would get on special teams, even though he wasn't typically a special teams guy on the defensive side. And he would just open up and get about 5-6 reps, which typically averaged out to around, 400 to 500 yards of high speed running. And that's how we were able to kind of build off that. Certain weeks where we did see him get it in games, we were able to make adjustments, and then he didn't have to, hop in on those Tuesdays, special team days. When it comes to, like I said, the uncontrollable, right? It's hard to take a kid out of his training environment or ask him to do less or ask him to do more, especially as an underclassman. But just simply collecting the data and having an understanding on my side of what's expected and what's seen in a football game from a two-way guy who gets 60 to 70 snaps a game was very insightful, you know. Because then we had on the other side of the spectrum, you had guys that were, I had another guy who's a third down guy coming off the bench who only averaged around 10 to 25 snaps a game. So for him was like during the week, we got after it, because we knew that he wasn't getting certain loads. He wasn't seeing the same loads as the other athletes, right? So we were able to take different approaches. I would essentially cut down reps and sets for, those guys that were enduring heavier loads. We would still hammer in some acceleration days and some, more top end speed days. But for the athletes that I knew were seeing a higher load during the week, we would definitely taper off. And the guys that I knew weren't seeing that, we would definitely ramp it up and get after it a little bit more. So I think it was just an awareness key. The kids were definitely coming back like, hey, coach, what did I do on Friday? Like, I had a big kick return or I had a big punt return. Like, how fast did I run? He was engaged with it. He's like, dude, I got smacked up on one of these plays. Like, how big of a collision was that one, So they always come back, and that was like American football. I did get a chance. St. Mary's soccer, I do work closely with on the women's side, where I do get a chance to control more of the training environment. We do wear GPS at the high school level for women's soccer. We did get a chance to wear it all season. And that was a little bit different, because now I was able to limit certain athletes to certain drills and be able to control certain variables in our practices as far as, it always comes down to volume, density, intensity. So for example, if we had a game on Tuesday, um, and a game on Friday, right? We would take different approaches with the length of the training session, the dimensions of whatever drill set we were doing, how many sets and reps of certain exercises were girls doing. If we were doing the drill for 10 minutes, our 90-minute girls were sitting out and only doing 5, right? So taking
Mhm.
different approaches by just automatically knowing that if I just take an athlete out of a drill and give her half the amount of time in that drill, she's going to get half the amount of load as the rest of the group, right? So it was really just kind of getting creative with, you know, and then we also had those girls doing some separate stuff. Like it was a whole flow and setup that we kind of found out that worked well. And the
I
girls
think that's
understood.
also a good point to bring up is that there's obviously a big difference between the private sector and team sector. Whereas like the team sector, like you've just mentioned, you're able to get a little bit more input on, okay, she's done too much this week, let's back off her next week to control some like injury rates or some fatigue, burnouts, all that stuff. Whereas in private sectors, you're a little bit more limited because it's not that like straightforward communication line. You've got different areas that you need to maybe stick to or abide by.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, like it was impossible for me to tell, even if a kid did have like a super high work week. For me in the gym, it was more so like we would really just taper off a lot, because I didn't want him to go through. It would just be a lot more active recovery in the weight room, opposed to those weeks where he maybe wasn't, maybe they had a week off, or maybe he didn't have the same. But it's just a matter of looking at the weeks of like, what do our climbs look like? What do our, what's our, and this is something that Les Spellman also taught me. Like we've gone into like highest game values, lowest game values, and then average game values, right? So we understand like what's the highest that we'll see in a game, what's the lowest that we're usually going to see in a game, and what's average what we're going to see in a game,
Mhm.
And once you kind of understand those three numbers, it's very easy to build backwards from there to understand training environment, right? Everyone likes to talk about game speed and training fast and practicing
Mhm.
fast, but if you don't have an idea on what actual game speed looks like, it's very, very hard to substitute your practices and make them that much more relatable to the actual demands of the game. So
Yeah.
demands of the game, demands of the specific sport, demands of the position is a big thing, because what a lineman does is different. And like what a lineman does is way different than what a linebacker does, and what a linebacker does is a lot different than what a cornerback does, and versus a quarterback, running back, wide receiver, all that stuff, right? So
100%.